So my name is Charlie. I'm senior software engineer at Algolia. And like all of you, I love front-end development. More specifically, I love single-page application. Because single-page application has been like a fast-evolving and challenging subject in the last 8 years, with a lot of brand new capabilities, like state management at the application level, not only component, routing on the client side, crypto, the new thing, progressive web apps, that is starting to eating slowly the world with better offline capabilities. And also, as we saw with the earlier talk, more complex rendering flows. With the evolution of browser API and the JavaScript language itself, but also thanks to React and its community and its ecosystem, it has never been easier to build more and more complex web application. However, when it comes to form, when it comes to developing and maintaining form, it's still a manual and repetitive task. Mainly because form consists in maintaining a glue between your UI and your backend API. So let's have a closer look to this definition. Your frontend is composed of a set of components that define the look and feel of your application. So a set of behaviors and style. On the other side, on the backend, resides the APIs that define everything about data. So validation, the shape of the data, the business logic. Form basically tried to mix those two things by bringing the best of the UI, so the look and feel of your application, and the requirement of your data. So let's have a concrete example of this very theoretical approach with a form developed with the awesome Formik library. This is a user form. So this is an example for the official documentation of Formik. It's a form to create a user. In order to create a user, we need an email and a password. We can see that we have validations, a set of fields, and custom components to fit our UI. What is our form development experience here? First, we have to duplicate the logic about validation and also what are the required fields for our form and maintain it to stay aligned with the APIs. On the UI side, we have to map every component of our application to the field. And we will have to do those two things for all the forms of our application and make it evolve. And what is worrying with this manual and repetitive work around form is that forms handle the experience that users have with data on your application. And we all know that nowadays, data is crucial. So form should be a nice experience on both user and developer side. Find out I was not the only person to think so. When I joined my previous company, before Algolia, the CTO replaced already started to work on improving the form development by creating a small framework around redux-form that was called module form. This is, again, a create user form using module form. We can see that when you use module form, you have to provide two things in order to create a form. First, you have to provide a field definition. So it's a plain JavaScript object that describes what are the fields, what are the types, and when there is an asterisk, it means that it's required. Module form, given this list, and especially given the type of each field, is going to pick the proper component of the application to render the form. The second thing is the name of the model. So here, it's a user form. And with this information, module form is going to handle two things. First, it's going to call a specific endpoint on the API to validate the data on backend side. And then since it's REST API, it's very easy to infer what kind of endpoint to call if you have the name of the model. So here's going to be /API/v1/users with a post. So what is our form development experience with this module form library? As we saw, on the front end, everything is done automatically. Like all the glue plumbing of matching component with the proper fields is done automatically for you. On the back end, all the thing about data is done by the API, validation and saving the data. The only thing that you have to do is provide the list of the fields that are required by the API and that you want to display, and also the name of the model. This was a very good solution to speed up the form development. But this is not the proper solution to have a better form development experience. for three main reasons. First, too many abstraction. Module form is kind of a black box that do some kind of magic, and we don't really have a control on it. Also, it's not flexible. Forms are not only about data, you have some business UI that you want to add that are not related to data, and here we don't have access to render props to customize the final rendering of the form. But the most important is that it's not the React way of working. Here we are not dealing with components, we are not dealing with functional thing, we are dealing with, not even with JSX, we are just providing a flat JavaScript object. It does its magic. So I was not really convinced. And after migrating the application from REST to GraphQL, I realized that we could take this idea and leverage GraphQL to truly bring a new front form development experience. So let's talk about leveraging GraphQL to improve form development. Quick introduction. So GraphQL is a new way for API to expose data. Unlike REST API, you contact a GraphQL API using HTTP requests. So you already know how to use GraphQL. A GraphQL API defines a schema. This schema is going to contain and define everything about the data. First, the data types. Data types about your application, your business. So a user, a company, a conversation, an image, anything about your application. Then comes the queries that explain how to read the data on this API. And finally, you have the mutation that explain about everything about mutate the data. Mutate meaning creating, updating, deleting. This is a GraphQL mutation. You can see that the syntax is very close to JSON, so it's easy for us front-end developer to use. And the important thing here is that you can see that the mutation can take as many arguments as needed. Here, we want to create an account on our application. And we can see that this mutation, create account, can take two types of data. First, we need a user that is mandatory and an optional company. And the beauty of GraphQL mutation that we can leverage for our forms is the fact that mutation in GraphQL are more defined on the business logic of the application than the data itself. What does it mean? It means that if we have an onboarding form that wants to create an account on our application, we're going to make one mutation, one HTTP request, in order to update data in many places. And all the complexity compared to REST API is totally hidden and handled by the GraphQL API. We're going to see after how it helps for form development. The second and most important point about GraphQL is introspection. Introspection is the ability on the GraphQL API to send a special query called an introspection query, and the GraphQL API is going to answer with a big JSON response describing everything about the schema. So let's see this together. We send an introspection query to the GraphQL API, and here it returns a very big JSON. So I cannot show you because it's like thousands of JSON, but here is the part that specifies the mutation that we just saw, the create account mutation. So we see that on this API, we have a create account mutation that have many arguments, and the first one, argument that is named user, is mandatory because it's kind non-null, and it's of type user type. So what does it mean, like, in a big picture? It means that with a GraphQL API, doing an introspection allows us to have this kind of sentence. You ask to the API, what can I do? And it reply, you can create an account on this application by providing a user and an optional company. And by the way, this is how a user looks like. A user has a mandatory first name, last name, email, optional avatar, etc. So let's sum up how this is going to help us with forms. First, we saw that mutation are closer to the business logic, meaning that it's achievable to have like one mutation by form of the application. Way simpler. And thanks to introspection, given a mutation name, just the name of a mutation, we can have all the fields and requirements of data that are needed for this form. So let's not stop about the theory and talk about the library I've built since the beginning of the year that takes shape of this idea, Frontier. Oh no, I forgot this slide. So this is our new developer experience. So just to recap, by providing a mutation name, we're gonna, thanks to introspection, we're gonna have the list of the required fields, and then depending of each type of the field, we're gonna instantiate the proper component. So let's now see a less theoretical approach and the real library that take this thing alive. Frontier. So Frontier is a library I've built with the help of Thomas, a contributor, especially on the design files. It's a form library that, thanks to GraphQL, brings you a better form development experience. First, let's talk about simplicity. Frontier gives you many ways to build form, but all of them are focusing on simplicity. Because Frontier is built on top of Final Form, that is a library created by the creator of redux-form, I think, that brings everything about form, all the property that you need in all kind of form library. So you will have access to all the property like dirty, touch, pristine, also all the modifier function that you need. And you have all of the box, state, and error management. There is many ways to use Frontier, and one of them is very similar to the way you use Formik. So let's have a look to this first version. This is, again, a create user form that uses Frontier. We are providing a mutation, an Apollo client, some initial values, and some wonder props. You can see that it's very familiar for you. You have everything that you already know. You have access to the values. You have access to some modifier function. You have access to the errors, etc., etc. By just providing two mandatory arguments that are the mutation, the GraphQL mutation, and an Apollo client. And just for you, like Formik, Frontier is handling the state management and the error management. However, did you notice that there is no save handler here? It's because, thanks to GraphQL, Frontier brings you a full data lifecycle management. So let's see together what it means. A form library deals with data, divided in 3 steps. The first one is getting the field definition and what is the shape of the data we're going to play with. Then keeping the state and giving insight to the user about what is the interaction, what is doing with the data. Is it correct? Can we save, etc. And finally, the final point of every form is to save the data. Frontier gives you this with just 2 mandatory arguments. You have access to all this without more configuration. Because thanks to the GraphQL mutation, we know what is the data we are working with. Thanks to Final Form, we have a clear and almost standard API to play with the state of the form and the errors. And thanks to the Apollo client that you give, we know how to save the data. So we can do the full experience out of the box. Let's now talk about the true differentiator of Frontier compared to other form library, is the UI kit. Because more and more applications nowadays have UI kits. So UI kits is a set of components that define what is the look and feel defined by your designer in the design system. So Material UI is a UI kit. We already saw earlier in this conference. Frontier allows you to define a UI kit and let Frontier do the rendering for you because it knows what to do. This is a form with Frontier that uses the full UI kit rendering. We just provide a mutation. Here we, again, want to create a user with a user input type. So user input type is a mandatory first name, last name, company name, and email. And then we are providing the mutation, a client, and a special variable that you built with the Frontier UI Kit API that is your UI Kit. And then it renders for you the form using your UI Kit. So here it's a UI Kit that has been built using the semantic UI Kit. We're going to see later how to build your UI Kit. You're going to see it's super easy. The last point, and the most important, is that Frontier is not a form generation. It's not a form builder. It's a form library. So this is impressive to have something that generates, but this is not the point of having a better form development experience. You can take at any moment back the control on the final rendering of the form by switching to render props, even when providing a UI kit. Because what happens if you have UI kit that is well defined, but the designer say, yeah, but you know, I want to have this very specific UI thing notice under this field. You do it by just taking back the control and switching to render props. So here, we are still providing 3 props, the Apollo client, the mutation, or define UI kit. But we are switching to render props, meaning that Frontier will not try to render anything. It gives you the control. And we get this very special, so form gives you access to the final form API, so you have access to the all state of the form. And kit is a special variable that gives you access to the rendering of each field of your form. So you have the control to render each field one by one. Here, we are rendering the company field is a string field. So in my UI kit, I have defined for the string field, I have a very specific way to work with string field. And then I can add what the designer is asking. Yeah, so this is the final rendering. So let's wrap up before having a demo what Frontier is bringing. First, the full data lifecycle, from having the shape of the data, maintaining the state, and saving the data, end to end. Then, if you want to industrialize or factorize the code of your application and not maintain all the form, you can use the UI kit full rendering or just to define your UI kit. But the most important is that Frontier is simple and iterative, because as you saw, you have many ways of building form with Frontier. It will fit to your form development flow, actual form development flow. Let's now have a demo with Code Sandbox to see how to define and use a UI kit in your application, and so advanced use case, so custom validation, complex types. Okay, so here is our user form. So this is the same user form that we saw earlier with the screenshot. It's fully interactive, so if I try to save, it knows that the fields are required. If I start to fill, everything updates. It's a form. So on the left, we have the mutation. As I said, we have 4 mandatory fields, and we just instantiate Frontier, and it generates the form for us. So how does it work under the hood? What Frontier does is crawling on each field and doing a kind of reducer approach. So when you define your UI kit, you use the API that we're going to see in like 30 seconds that define, in the very same way that you use Redux, how to reduce what is the component that's going to match this field with this priority. So I'm Frontier, I'm crawling the field, I'm stepping on the company. I see, okay, it's a company field, so the path of this field is createUser.company. I'm going to call the UI kit, the resolver of the UI kit, to say, hey, do you have a component for this createUser.company? No? Okay. Do you have a component for a string field? Yes, I have. Okay, I'm going to use it. And if it's not the case, if there is no component defined for this specific type or class, it's going to fall back to an unknown component that is by default null and do a console1 in the console. So how does it work, this UI kit thing? Let's take a look at the doc. So in order to create a UI kit for your application, you have access to a UI kit function that gives you access to many methods that looks very like a pattern matching. So you have a method to define what's going to be the form React element that's going to wrap all your form. So you have access to the form state, the children. You have also a method to say, okay, if there is a field that is a type string, this resolver is going to be called with all the information that you need, the path, is it required, children, and also in the props, you have access to the field state. So this is going to return a component. When you want to match with the path, you can choose to make a partial match using regexcepts. So it's better when you want to factorize your code, or you can have like a very strict pattern matching on the path of the name of the field. So let's see a more concrete example with the living application. This is my UI kit for this demo. So it's using semantic React. It's import UI kit. You have also some translation. I won't be able to cover the translation subject, but it's in the documentation. I have a field wrapper that wraps all the fields that is used in the resolver. I have my form. So this form is pretty simple. I have the onSubmit. If the form is submitting, I want to have like a loader that Semantic UI provides with CSS, and I have my input. And here I have my string field. So I have my field wrapper, and what field wrapper does, it just add the label, the small red asterisk if it's required, etc. And I have an input. Let's see a more advanced example about this component. Here, it's another form. We want to create a feedback. So, I don't know, it's Airbnb, very early stage version. I want to create a feedback, so I have to provide a rating and a comment. The rating is an integer, and the comment is a string. If I do not change the UI kit, I'm going to end up having like just 2 inputs, one that takes like a number, and the other one that's going to be like a very small input for a comment that is aimed to be like more a text area. So how do? I go in my UI kit, and I say, okay, so if you find something that is that has a writing in the name of the property, I'm going to use the writing component of semantic UI. And for comment, if it's match comment somewhere in the name of the property, we're going to use text area. And this is how it will look like in the end. So yeah, it's a rating component. I can write a feedback, and I can save the data. So it's very easy to use. For the translation, the thing is that it's the field wrapper. So this component wraps every kind of field. And basically, we just have like a mapping of the name of the property with translation. So it allows you to plug to any kind of translation system that you use in your application. Let's now have an example with complex type. So here we have a very, very specific form. This is a form for a cat contest. So you want to register your cat to a cat contest. And so there is many cats. And you have to provide your first name, your last name, optional. It can be like an anonymous submission. Why not? And you have an array of cats. So how does it look like? Yeah. So here we have a first name. Those are string fields. So we already know how to handle them. And here we have an array of objects that are cat objects that are just require a name of a cat. So we have our custom components to add them. And yeah, this is what we expect in terms of UI on the form for complex type. So again, how does it work in our UI kit? For now, since this is the only array field I have in my application, I'm using the type resolver. But if I have many array, I'm going to have many components, so it's going to be easier to use path matching instead of type matching. So it's very done in the same way as your define component with a string field. The only difference is that the value is going to be an array of objects that have a certain shape. And here we can see that there is a lot of JSX because we are using a table. Every time we do something, we are updating the state, having like a little helper function that do props.change. Nothing very magic here, it's just simple, flat React functional component. Let's see a last example with custom validation, because we have an issue here. In terms of business, in terms of real user interface, you cannot have this kind of experience. When you fill an email, and if it's not a valid email, it just says, yeah, it's fine. I mean, it's a string, the API don't care. So we want an email, so how do we do that? So same form. So the thing is that GraphQL for now, the standard doesn't allow to extract the directive. So we cannot like extract and get the custom validation of the data. So you will have to give those custom validation to Frontier for now. So here, the thing is that Frontier is using a validation library under the hood that I'm going to talk just after that provides default types out of the box. So emails, URL, and others. Here, we see that we have a props that is named format, and we say, okay, the field email is an email. So validate with this information. So it's going to say, okay, there is an error. It's not an email. If I put an @ it still doesn't work, and then it works. So there is default validation. What if you want to add custom validation? Because I don't know, maybe you have a very specific handle, a very specific type of information you want to validate. So we're going to take a look. Here you have add format. So add format is a method exposed by Frontier that you have to call before using the forms. And here we see, okay, I'm overriding the validation of email by providing a regex. And it works. So this is a way of overriding the validation and add validation to your application. Let's go back to the presentation. So as you saw, Frontier is a form library, React form library that works with GraphQL, especially with Apollo. But under the hood, Frontier is built for the future. What does it mean? Frontier is divided in 3 parts. The first one is Frontier data. Frontier data is the part, the service of the library that takes any kind of data and translates it to JSON schema. That is a well-known standard to deal with data. So for now, it only works with Apollo GraphQL. This JSON schema go to Frontier Core. And Frontier Core is totally framework and data agnostic. It works only with JSON schema by using AGV, that is a fast data validation working with JSON schema, and final form to handle the state, the error, etc. Then Frontier Core is talking to a render part of Frontier. For now, the only rendering part of Frontier is React. So there is a React component that talks with Frontier core, and via Frontier core talk to Frontier data, the GraphQL part. What does it mean for the future? It means that it would be cool to have Swagger support for people that don't want or cannot migrate to GraphQL. And a fun fact is that Swagger is using JSON schema, so it's going to be even easier than the GraphQL part. Support more flavors. Support more renderers, because Frontier core is agnostic, so we can have implementation with Vue.js, Angular, React Native Web, any kind of framework. And also API improvement, because we are just getting started. This is the first version. I'm sure there is a lot of things to improve. If you're curious, go to frontier-forms.dev. This is a documentation website. You will find everything that you need to get started. Especially there is like code sandbox box that show examples to how to play and get started. So you don't have to install it. You can use the code sandbox box and fork it and start to play with it. Also, you have the link to the GitHub, so you can submit feedback, feature requests, issues, and we'll talk about it. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach after during the break, especially if you have questions about the library, if you have questions about Algolia. And also, I'm going to publish an article in the upcoming weeks about this presentation on honest engineering. That is a blog about having a different view on the web engineering. So there is an article I've wrote that is called Why Use GraphQL Good and Bad Reason, that gives you good reason or not to use GraphQL. Does your project need it or not? Thank you very much.